The rain came down in sheets that blurred the mountains into smudges of ink. The stone steps leading up to the small roadside shrine were slick with moss, and thunder cracked like a whip across the sky. He stumbled up those steps like a man fighting ghosts. His dark cloak was torn, one arm hanging limp, his shoulder drenched in blood that the rain could not wash away fast enough. The sword in his hand scraped against the ground, leaving a jagged trail in the mud as if it were too heavy even for him. By the time he reached the shrine, his legs buckled. The small wooden structure was nothing more than 4 posts and a roof sheltering a weather-worn statue of a mountain god, but it was the only refuge in sight. He collapsed before the statue, one knee hitting the stone with a hollow sound. His fingers clenched around the sword, the blade angled protectively across his chest, even as his vision swam. That was when I arrived. Ah? What's this? I tilted my head, clutching my basket of herbs under my cloak. The storm had ruined my plans to gather roots in the valley, but stumbling upon a half-dead warrior bleeding all over the gods. Floor was not what I had expected either. I squatted beside him, ignoring the way his glare tried to skewer me. You're bleeding all over the shrine floor. If the gods strike you dead, don't blame me. His lips pulled back in a snarl, though he lacked the strength to rise. Leave me. I tapped my chin. You're far too heavy to leave behind. And besides, I leaned closer, noting the fever already burning in his skin, the way his breath rasped through clenched teeth. If you die here, I'll have to drag your body out anyway, so I may as well keep you alive first. He blinked at me, as if no one had dared speak to him like that in years. I ignored the weight of his stare, slipped my arm under his, and hauled him upright with surprising determination for someone smaller in build. He nearly toppled me, but sheer stubbornness won out. You, he muttered. Me, I chirped back. The wandering physician at your service. Now, hush, save your strength for not bleeding on my shoes. The storm swallowed his answer, but I felt his weight sag against me. That was good enough. By the time I shoved the door of my hut open, my hair and clothes clung to me like wet rags. I helped him walk. The stranger was heavier than an ox, his sword dragging furrows across my floor as I pulled him in. He tried to protest again, his hand twitching toward the weapon. Do not touch! Oh, hush! I shoved him down onto the mat by the fire pit. If you bite me while I'm stitching, I'll bite you back. His glare was murderous. It would have been intimidating too, if not for the fact that he was pale as death and shivering. I knelt beside him, pulling out a roll of bandages and a needle already threaded. My hands moved quickly, unfastening his blood-soaked armor. He hissed when I peeled the leather back from the wound on his shoulder, but I only hummed thoughtfully. A deep slash, nearly to the bone, I murmured. Whoever did this wasn't aiming to scare you. His jaw clenched, silent. Fine, don't tell me your tragic story, I added, dabbing at the wound. He flinched, but I pressed harder, ignoring him. But if you faint while I'm working, don't expect me to carry your corpse uphill again. His chest rumbled with something between a growl and a laugh. I chose to pretend it was the latter. Thread through skin, tug tight, tie off. His blood was hot against my fingers, but his skin was hotter still. Fever already. I worked swiftly, binding the wound and forcing him to drink the bitter tonic I brewed. He spat half of it out, but I pinched his nose until he swallowed. There, I said at last, sitting back with a grin. See? Not so bad. He scowled. You speak too much. And you don't speak enough. I wagged a finger at him. Balance is important. His eyes narrowed, but they softened for the briefest flicker of a moment before his head tipped back against the wall, exhaustion dragging him under. The storm had passed by morning. Sunlight slanted through the cracks in the shutters, gilding the hut in pale gold. Birds sang outside, loud and obnoxious after a night of thunder. The man stirred on the mat, his hand groping instinctively for his sword, only to find nothing. His eyes snapped open, sharp even in grogginess. The smell of roasting fish filled the air. Looking for this? I asked cheerfully from the fire pit. His sword was balanced across the stones, skewering 3 fat river fish that sizzled in the heat. The handle jutted out awkwardly, wrapped in smoke. He sat up so fast he nearly tore his stitches. "What are you doing?" "Breakfast." I flipped a fish with my chopsticks. "What's the point of a sword if it can't even cook breakfast?" His face turned a dangerous shade of red. For a moment, I wondered if he would strangle me with his bandages. Instead, he pressed a hand over his eyes, muttering curses I pretended not to understand. I plucked a fish from the blade, placed it on a plate, and set it in front of him. "Eat. Then you can scowl at me properly." He stared at me like I was mad, but his stomach growled louder than his pride, and eventually he tore into the fish with sharp, controlled movements. The sight of this fierce, wounded warrior chewing my breakfast in silence made me smile. He caught me looking and snapped, "What?" I shrugged. "Nothing. Just wondering if you're less scary when your mouth is full." For the first time, his lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but not the pure scowl he had worn since the shrine either. And I thought, perhaps, this stranger in the rain was not so impossible to keep alive after all. By the second day, the storm had passed, and the mountains were washed clean, green leaves dripping with water that sparkled like gemstones in the sun. The man I had dragged half dead into my hut was awake earlier than me, already trying to stand when I shuffled out with messy hair and a yawn. His sword, polished after I'd scrubbed off the fish grease, was strapped back to his waist, though his bandages were still fresh. I nearly dropped my teacup. "You're leaving?" He didn't look at me as he adjusted the straps. "I have tarried long enough." His voice was low, like gravel grinding against stone. "There are matters I must attend to." I squinted at him. His movements were stiff, his shoulders tight with pain he thought he was hiding. When he reached for the door, his knees buckled. I darted forward and caught his arm before he face-planted into the floor. "Oh, brilliant," I muttered, hauling him back toward the mat. "Strong, yes, but strong idiots still die if they don't rest." His glare burned hotter than the morning sun. "I do not need help," I cut him off cheerfully. "Clearly you do. Otherwise you'd be sprawled in the mud right now instead of ruining my floor." His jaw worked, but no words came. His pride was thicker than his bandages, but even pride couldn't mask the tremor in his legs. I pushed him down firmly. "Sit, eat, heal, repeat. Those are your only duties here." He looked as though he'd rather be skewered again than obey, but when his stomach growled audibly, I arched an eyebrow. That silenced him faster than any sword could. Later that afternoon, while I was sorting herbs, he sat cross-legged by the fire, sharpening his blade with slow, practiced strokes. The sound was rhythmic, like a heartbeat against steel. "You stare too much," he said without lifting his head. I blinked, caught. "You polish that thing like it's your wife." His hand paused. "It is my life." I leaned my chin on my hand. Looks more like a broom to me." That got his attention. His head lifted, eyes narrowing. "A broom?" "Sure," I said innocently. "Long stick, swishy end, used for sweeping away trouble." He stared at me as though I had committed sacrilege. Then slowly, he rose, towering over me with sword in hand. For a moment, I thought he might actually throw me out the window. Instead, he thrust the hilt toward me. "Show me how you would wield it, then." I blinked. "Me? Oh no, I'm more skilled with herbs." His expression didn't change. The sword remained extended. I sighed dramatically, snatched the weapon from him, and stood. It was heavy, far heavier than I expected. I swung it experimentally, like a broom. The tip wobbled dangerously close to the ceiling beams. He pressed his palm to his forehead. I grinned at him. "See? Sweeps quite nicely." "Give it here." His voice was tight, but when I staggered sideways trying to balance the blade, he caught me from behind, his large hands closing over mine to steady the grip. "This," he said, low against my ear, "is how you hold a sword." His hands adjusted my stance, my shoulders, the angle of my arms. I swallowed, suddenly very aware of the warmth of his body against my back. "Now strike," he ordered. I did. The sword clanged harmlessly against the chopping block, almost bouncing from my grip. I laughed nervously. "Effective," If we're attacking turnips. For a heartbeat, silence. Then, soft, rusty, like a lock turning after years unused, a laugh. I froze. He froze. It wasn't cruel or mocking, just low and rough, almost surprised. I turned to stare at him. His face was still severe, but the corners of his lips curved, his eyes softened, and for the first time since I'd found him in the rain, he looked human instead of carved from stone. "Ah," I breathed. "You can laugh." His smile vanished instantly. He took the sword back and sat down as if nothing had happened, but I didn't miss the faint flush at his ears. The night was quiet, crickets chirping in the grass, moonlight spilling silver across the mountain slope. I woke to find the mat beside the fire empty, the faint smell of steel and pine drifting in through the door. Outside, he stood like a statue, sword across his knees, eyes scanning the dark forest as if danger lurked behind every rustling leaf. His broad shoulders were tense, outlined in pale light, scars catching the glow. I rubbed my eyes and patted over barefoot. "Can't sleep?" His head tilted slightly, but he didn't look at me. Habit. I studied him for a moment. The chill night air bit at my skin, and I noticed the thinness of his shirt, how the mountain wind tugged at his hair. Without thinking, I draped the blanket I carried over his shoulders. He stiffened, glancing down at the fabric. I yawned and plopped beside him, hugging my knees. "You keep watch. We'll keep you warm. Fair trade, huh?" His mouth opened, then closed. He didn't push the blanket off. The moonlight painted his profile in silver, highlighting the hard lines of his jaw, the faint furrow of his brow. But when his gaze finally drifted down to me, already nodding off beside him, hair falling over my eyes, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. His fingers brushed the blanket where it touched his hand, as if memorizing the warmth. For a long time, he sat like that, sword in one hand, silent watch in the other, and me leaning against his arm without fear. When the wind shifted, carrying the scent of herbs and smoke, I thought I heard him murmur something low, almost to himself. Strange little healer. But I was already asleep, and the night held his words. The mountain path wound down into the village, and for the first time since I'd patched him up, I dragged the grim stranger out of my hut. His wounds had healed enough to walk, though he still moved stiffly. "Carry these," I said, dumping 2 baskets of dried herbs and roots into his arms. He stared at me. "I am not your servant." I gave him a bright smile. "Of course not, but my spine isn't built for carrying stones disguised as medicine, and yours looks sturdy enough. Consider it physical therapy." His jaw tightened, but he didn't refuse. The sight of him, tall, scarred, carrying baskets of leaves like a grumpy pack mule, was so absurd I had to bite my tongue to stop laughing. The villagers noticed immediately. Heads turned as we passed the well and stepped onto the market street. "Who is that?" someone whispered. "Never seen him before. Look at those scars." "Dangerous sort. Why is he with Dr. Lin?" I waved cheerfully at the gossipers. "Don't mind him. That's just his natural face. Always looks like he swallowed a lemon whole." The general's hand flexed on the basket handles. "You speak too freely." Yes. But isn't it better than letting them think you're plotting murder? Smile for me, won't you?" His only response was a deeper scowl. I patted his arm as though he were an oversized dog. Good enough. The market buzzed with midday chatter, children darting between stalls as merchants shouted prices. My companion, however, was scaring half the street into silence just by existing. His battered armor was splattered with old stains, his expression grim enough to sour the morning sun. "Honestly," I muttered, planting myself in front of him, "you're walking around dressed like a half-dead war god, and you wonder why the cabbage sellers are making warding signs behind your back. We're buying you robes." "I need no such thing," he said, voice like stone, shifting the herb basket on his shoulder. "Clothing is irrelevant," he added. "Tell that to the poor baby who cried when you frowned at the fishmonger," I shot back. You're not just irrelevant, you're terrifying. If you insist on carrying my herbs around, you're getting a new look. I refuse to be seen with a man who looks like he wrestled a bear and lost. Before he could argue, I seized his sleeve and dragged him toward the tailor's stall. The tailor paled when he saw the general, hands frozen mid-fold. He needs something plain, I announced. Something that doesn't scream, "I'll burn your village for breakfast." Do you have robes for, I squinted at the general, then waved vaguely at his shoulders. Giants? The general shot me a look sharp enough to cut thread. The tailor, fighting a nervous laugh, thrust a dark blue robe into my hands. I shoved it at the general. Here, try this, and don't you dare rip it with those shoulders. He muttered, but stepped behind the curtain. When he emerged, the robe draped over his frame, plain and unadorned, the deep blue softening the harshness of his scarred face. I blinked, then grinned. Well, well, look at you. You actually look like a person instead of a thundercloud with legs. He adjusted the belt stiffly. It is serviceable. Serviceable? I scoffed. I reached forward without warning, tugging the robe's collar straight, brushing close to his chest. He stiffened, but I ignored him. The fabric's light. You won't melt under the summer sun. And blue? Yes, blue makes you look less like you've crawled out of a battlefield ditch. I circled him once, tugging at a sleeve, smoothing the fold at his shoulder. Still a bit wide here, but it makes your arms look decent, so you're welcome. His throat worked, but his voice came out gruff. You fuss too much. And you brood too much, I said cheerfully, stepping back to admire my handiwork. Lucky for you to have me. I tossed a few coins to the tailor, ignoring the general's glare. As we walked away, I smirked. You know, in this robe, you almost look approachable. Dangerous, yes, but approachable. You'd even pass for someone's long-suffering cousin. He grunted something non-committal, but when I caught his reflection in a window, I saw it. The faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile. We stepped back into the street, and for once the stares he drew weren't sharp with fear, more curious, even appreciative. A passing villager, an elderly woman with a basket of pears, paused and smiled. That robe suits you, young man. Makes you look almost handsome. I clapped a hand dramatically to my chest. Almost? Oh no, madam, don't encourage him. If his head swells any further, I'll need stronger medicine for the ego. The general's ears went faintly red. He cleared his throat and strode ahead without a word. I trotted after him, smirking. Handsome, See? I told you blue was your color. Maybe next time I'll get you something in silk. His growl was low, dangerous. Don't. But the way his shoulders hunched ever so slightly told me enough. He was embarrassed, and for once not by his scars or his past, but because someone had seen him as something other than a weapon. And I decided with wicked delight that I would never let him live it down. While I haggled for rice noodles at a stall, a group of local layabouts leaned against the post, snickering. One, bold enough, stepped forward, his eyes sliding over me. Pretty doctor, he sneered. Why don't you leave this scary stranger and share a drink with us instead? I waved him off. No thanks. I prefer men who bathe at least once a week. The stall-keeper snorted. The thugs didn't take it well. The leader reached to grab my sleeve. Before his hand even touched me, the general moved. It was over in a blink. One thug's wrist twisted until he screamed, another shoved face first into the dirt, and the leader found himself dangling by the collar, lifted like a misbehaving child. The entire market froze. I blinked. Well, that escalated quickly. The general's voice was ice. Touch him again, and you will not keep your hands. The thugs scrambled back, bruised and terrified, and fled down the street. I sighed and tugged on the general's sleeve. Honestly, was that necessary? His brows furrowed. They threatened you. Yes, but if you break their bones, who's going to pay their medical bills? I jabbed a finger at his chest. Me! For a moment, his lips pressed into a line, unreadable. Then, just faintly, his shoulders eased. You talk too much, he muttered. "And you fight too much. Balance, General. Balance." I shook my head, returning to my noodles. "I swear you're like a wolf guarding a chicken coop. Very loyal, very terrifying." From the corner of my eye, I caught the ghost of something almost like amusement in his gaze. By evening, the market square transformed. Lanterns of red and gold floated on strings above the streets. Children darted with sparklers, and stalls bustled with food and music. I grabbed his hand without warning. "Come on!" He stiffened instantly, glaring down at our joined hands. "Where?" "To the festival, of course." I tugged, ignoring his glower. "What, you've never seen lanterns before? Then tonight you're going to." He allowed himself to be dragged, though his grip on my hand never loosened. People gave us a wide berth, but I hardly noticed. The glow of paper lanterns reflected in his dark eyes was more captivating than the festival itself. We stopped by the riverbank where villagers lit floating candles and set them adrift. I pressed one into his hand. "Make a wish." He stared at the small flame, his scarred fingers trembling ever so slightly. "Wishes are for children." I leaned closer, grinning. "Then call it practice, for living." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he placed the candle on the water. The flame drifted away, golden and steady, joining hundreds of others. I watched his face in the soft glow. The hard lines softened, the shadows in his eyes gentler. When he turned, he found me staring. "What?" he asked gruffly. "Nothing," I said, smiling as I looked away. "Just, you look less like a thundercloud under lantern light." His hand twitched at his side, as though tempted to reach for me. But instead, he only stood there, silent, watching the lights fade down the river while I hummed a festival tune beside him. And though he said nothing, the space between us felt warmer than the hundreds of lanterns overhead. The next morning, the village was alive again with trade and chatter. I was squatting by a stall comparing ginger roots when voices cut through the noise. "General Wei?" I glanced up. A pair of men stood frozen mid-step, battered armor strapped to their shoulders, one leaning on a crutch, the other with a scar running down his cheek. They weren't strangers to hardship. Soldiers, unmistakably. Their gazes locked on the man behind me. The general's back stiffened. His hand drifted unconsciously toward his sword hilt, though it remained sheathed. "It is you," the limping soldier whispered. His voice shook. "General Wei, the Iron Wolf of the frontier." "Alive?" Around us, heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Iron Wolf. General. The war hero who vanished. My heart lurched. "General Wei?" I turned slowly, staring at the man who had eaten fish from my hearth and carried my herb baskets like a reluctant mule. His jaw was set, his eyes cold as steel. I almost laughed from shock. So my rain-soaked stray isn't just some wandering fighter. He is the Empire as missing Thundercloud. And he never said a word. I didn't wait for the crowd to thin. I dragged him out of the marketplace by his sleeve, ignoring his sighs and protests, until we stood in the narrow alley behind the granary. The words burst from me. "You could have said, 'Hello, I'm wanted by half the Empire,' when I found you bleeding on a shrine floor." His gaze didn't waver. "It was not your concern." "Not my—" I threw my arms up. "Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? Soldiers looking for deserters, bounty hunters sniffing for coin, gods know who else." "I am no deserter." His voice cracked like a whip. "I led men into battle until none were left to follow. I lost everything worth protecting. What I am now is nothing." The anger in my chest faltered at the rawness in his tone. But I refused to soften. "Not yet." "You could have told me," I said, softer now, though the edge lingered. "Do you know what it feels like? Nursing every scar and fever, not realizing I was sheltering a man the whole Empire is hunting?" His jaw clenched. He looked away as though the alley wall was safer than my eyes. "I did not wish to drag you into the shadow of my disgrace." For a moment, silence. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Then I exhaled, the fight draining from my shoulders. "You stubborn ox," I muttered. "Do you think I cared for your name? It's your wounds I stitched, your fevers I watched, not your banners." His head turned just slightly, eyes flickering with something unsteady. I crossed my arms, forcing a crooked smile. "You call yourself nothing, but I've carried you half dead through a storm, cleaned your blood off my floors, and listened to your snoring rattle my roof. Nothing doesn't keep me up at night. Nothing doesn't steal my fish when I'm not looking. Don't you dare call yourself nothing." The words tumbled out sharper than I intended, but underneath, they were the truest things I'd said. He stared at me as if I'd struck him, not with anger, but with surprise. For the first time, his mask slipped, just a fraction, and in his eyes I saw not the infamous general, but a man who hadn't expected anyone to choose him for who he was now. By the time we returned to my hut, he had reopened the stitches along his side. Typical. "Sit," I ordered. He obeyed without his usual protests, lowering himself onto the mat. His face was pale, lips pressed thin with pain he wouldn't voice. I fetched clean bandages, kneeling beside him. My fingers worked with practiced care, but my chest still buzzed with leftover anger. "You were lucky I don't sew your mouth shut while I am at it," I muttered, tugging at the bloodied cloth. His lips twitched, almost a smile. "You would try. Don't tempt me." I pressed the fresh cloth against his skin. The warmth of his body bled through, steady and solid beneath my hands. For once, he didn't flinch from my touch. He only watched me, dark eyes unreadable as my fingers brushed his ribs, lingered too long smoothing the bandage. I cleared my throat, trying to ignore the heat rising in my face. "Hold still." I am still. "You're glaring holes into my skull. That counts as movement." A huff of air escaped him, almost a laugh, almost not. When the bandages were secure, I sat back, exhaling. My hand brushed his by accident, just a fleeting touch, but neither of us pulled away at once. His hand was calloused, roughened by years of sword work. Mine, stained faintly with herbs and ink. Different, yet they fit in that brief, stolen contact. I looked up, met his gaze. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to the quiet crackle of the fire, the closeness of our knees, the weight of unspoken things. Then I snatched my hand back, heart hammering. "There, all done. Try not to rip it open again, or I'll start charging extra." He studied me, eyes softer now, as if he'd seen through my bluster to the worry beneath. "I will try," he said. It wasn't a promise, but for him it was enough. The night air smelled of roasted chestnuts from the festival stalls, laughter still echoing faintly in the hills. I had just finished setting out herbs to dry when shouts erupted at the edge of the village. "Bandits! Bandits!" The call spread like fire through the streets. Villagers scrambled, doors slammed, and the glow of torches flared in the dark. I turned, heart pounding, and there he was, already striding toward the chaos, sword gleaming in his hand. "You're still injured," I hissed, grabbing his sleeve. He shook me off with a glance that brooked no argument. Better me than them. The clash began at the village gates. A ragged group of raiders, faces masked with cloth, surged forward with crude weapons. The villagers, unarmed and terrified, scattered. The general stepped into their path. Even weakened, he moved with terrifying precision, blade flashing silver in the torchlight. Each strike was efficient, brutal, honed by decades of command. But I saw it, the stiffness in his left arm, the way his breaths came sharp and shallow. His wounds hadn't healed enough. And still, I couldn't make myself leave. One bandit broke past him, charging toward me with a raised club. I froze. Before the blow could fall, the general's blade swept down, knocking the weapon aside, his body shielding mine completely. The force sent pain through his own wound. I saw him grimace, stagger. "Idiot!" I shouted, half in fear, half in fury. "Don't kill yourself on my behalf." His only answer was a growl as he shoved me back toward safety. "Stay behind me." But I didn't. I stayed at his side, clutching nothing more than a wooden pestle, heart pounding as though I could fight off shadows with sheer stubbornness. By dawn, the bandits were driven off, leaving the village battered but standing. The general, however, did not rise with the sun. His body burned with heat, his wounds seeping fresh blood where the stitches had torn. He collapsed against the mat, breath ragged, skin damp with sweat. I nearly tore my herb baskets apart looking for fever remedies. "Don't you dare die," I muttered, wringing out a cloth to cool his forehead. My hands shook as I pressed it to his burning skin. "I still haven't charged you for saving your life, you know, and the bill is getting longer by the day." He didn't stir. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced myself steady. I brewed decoctions, changed bandages, whispered curses and comforts all in the same breath. Hour after hour, I sat by his side, coaxing water to his lips, wiping sweat from his brow, refusing to blink in case he slipped away in the moments I wasn't looking. At one point, his hand twitched weakly, grasping at nothing. Without thinking, I caught it, lacing my fingers through his. His calloused palm was burning hot, but I clung as though the strength of my grip could tether him to this world. "Stubborn ox," I whispered. "If you dare leave me with all these villagers to treat alone, I'll drag you back by the ear." The fever broke near midnight. He stirred, eyes half open, voice hoarse with delirium. "Lynn!" My breath caught. He had never said my name like that before. Soft, unguarded, vulnerable. "I'm here," I murmured, adjusting the blanket. "Save your strength." His gaze, clouded with fever, fixed on me as if I were the only thing left in the world. His lips moved, words slipping free without the shield of pride or caution. "I cannot lose you." I froze. My hand tightened in his. "I lost men, brothers, an empire's faith." His eyes fluttered shut, breath shallow. "But not you. Not you too." Silence filled the hut, broken only by the crackle of the fire. My heart thundered so loudly, I thought it might shake the rafters down. I swallowed hard, heat rushing to my face. "You're delirious," I said quickly, though my voice trembled. "I didn't hear anything. Nothing at all." But I didn't let go of his hand. I sat there, face aflame, watching the rise and fall of his chest as he drifted back into fitful sleep. And though I pretended not to hear, the words burrowed deep into my heart, glowing like an ember that refused to die. The sun spilled over the mountain ridge, warm and golden after days of storm and smoke. The village had settled back into a fragile peace, though repairs still echoed with hammer and saw. The general had shaken off most of his fever, though I still caught him swaying when he thought I wasn't looking. That didn't stop him from standing in the clearing behind my hut, sword in hand, eyes fixed on me. "Again," he said. I groaned, hefting the practice staff he had cut for me. "You nearly died of fever yesterday, and today you want to beat me with a stick?" His expression didn't flicker. "If you cannot even defend yourself against a stick, how will you survive blades?" I muttered something unflattering under my breath, but took my stance anyway. The first clash was clumsy. My grip slipped, the staff wobbled, and his sword tapped my wrist with infuriating precision. "Too loose," he said. "I'm a physician, not a soldier," I retorted, shaking out my stinging hand. "Not today." He stepped closer, moving behind me, his arms bracketing mine as he adjusted my grip. I froze. His chest brushed my back, his hand warm over mine, guiding the staff into place. His voice was low by my ear, steady and patient. "Like this. Firm, but not rigid. Feel the weight. Breathe with it." My breath promptly forgot how to function. The world shrank to the circle of his arms, the heat of his body, the roughness of his scarred fingers over my own. "Better," he murmured. It's very distracting when you stand that close," I blurted. His lips curved just faintly. "Good. Distraction teaches focus." I wanted to throw the staff at his head. Instead, I swung again, this time stronger, steadier. He let go, watching intently as if he had carved strength into me with his own hands. When I glanced back at him, the faintest smile lingered on his face. That evening, we sat by a small fire outside the hut, The villagers celebrated survival in the square, but I stayed here, knees tucked to my chest, staring at the sparks curling into the dark. The general sat opposite, sword resting across his knees. For a long while, silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of wood. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, almost reluctant. I was betrayed. I looked up. My men followed me into the jaws of death. We held the frontier for years, against enemies stronger and more numerous than we should have endured. But the court, they feared my strength more than they valued it. Supplies withheld, reinforcements delayed. My soldiers starved while ministers fattened themselves. His hand tightened on the hilt, knuckles white. When the end came, I was not defeated by the enemy's sword, but by my own empire's treachery. The firelight carved deep shadows into his face, grief and fury etched in every line. My chest ached. Without thinking, I blurted the first thought that came to my mind. You're scary, yes, but I like you better when you smile. He blinked. The fire snapped between us. Do you ever listen to yourself? He asked, voice rough. Nope. I hugged my knees tighter, meeting his gaze without flinching. You're terrible at hiding things, you know. Your scowl is heavy, but your smile, it's lighter, like maybe you're still human under all that armor. For a long heartbeat, he stared at me. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted, and for a moment he looked less like a fallen general and more like the man who had laughed once when I swung his sword like a broom. The fire had burned low, glowing embers casting soft light across the clearing. The air was still, heavy with the weight of things unspoken. He shifted closer. Not looming, not commanding, just near enough that his warmth brushed against me. His hand hesitated, then touched mine, tentative where it had once been firm. I didn't pull away. His gaze met mine, dark, searching, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. For once, there was no scowl, no shield of pride, only a question. My breath caught, my heart hammered, and then, without words, he leaned in. The kiss was quiet, hesitant, almost clumsy. Just the press of lips, warm and trembling, but it felt like the world had gone still around us. The fire, the crickets, the village beyond. All of it faded until there was only him. When he drew back, barely a hair's breadth, I found myself leaning forward, unwilling to let the moment slip entirely. He exhaled, as though he'd been holding his breath for years. Lynn. I swallowed hard, cheeks burning. You're supposed to be resting. His lips curved faintly. I am, and though neither of us dared say more, the silence between us was no longer empty. It was full of warmth, of fear, of something fragile and impossible to ignore. The mountain air was brittle that morning, crisp enough that the dew clung like frost on every blade of grass. I was crouched outside the hut, gathering herbs into bundles, when the distant thud of hooves reached my ears. Not village carts, not the occasional peddler, soldiers. By the time I stood, he was already at my side. The general, my general, face grim, hand instinctively falling to the sword at his hip. He didn't even have to say it. I knew. Stay inside, he murmured. As if I ever listened to that, I muttered back. The riders came into view. 5 Imperial soldiers, armor dulled from the road, but still bearing the insignia of the capital. Their leader's gaze swept the village, sharp and searching. When they reached my hut, he barked, "By order of the court, we seek a man, a traitor, a general who abandoned his post and fled to the mountains. Have you seen such a one?" I tilted my head, faced the picture of innocence. A general? Here? Do you think a great general would waste his time letting me boss him around? He's just my useless cousin. Behind me, I could feel the man in question stiffen. I stepped casually into the doorway, blocking their view, and flapped my herb bundle for emphasis. Besides, would a great war hero really be stuck chopping wood and carrying baskets for a physician who doesn't even pay him? Look at him. Skinny, surly, smells like smoke. That's my cousin. The soldiers exchanged doubtful glances. The general, for once, was silent. His scowl might have given him away if I hadn't kept chattering. Do you want to know what his grand talent is? I leaned in confidentially toward the commander. He snores like a boar, shakes the walls at night. If he were a great general, the enemy would have tracked him by sound alone. A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Even the commander's stern mouth twitched before he forced it still. Very well. If you see anyone suspicious, report it. Oh, absolutely, I said, all smiles. If I see a great general hiding in my herb shed, you'll be the first to know. They rode on. I stood in the doorway until the sound of hooves faded into the mountain road. Only then did I turn back. He stood in the shadows, shoulders rigid, gaze fixed not on me but somewhere far away, toward duty, toward war, toward the empire that had abandoned him. The hut was quiet except for the crackle of the fire. He strapped on his blade, movement steady, purposeful. So that's it? I snapped, slamming down the basket of herbs I'd been sorting. They come sniffing, and your first thought is to run again? I cannot endanger this village. His voice was calm, but I heard the steel underneath. If they return in greater numbers, if they discover me here. So what? You'll go throw yourself back into the jaws of an empire that already chewed you up and spat you out? I hurled a bundle of dried roots at his chest. It bounced harmlessly off his armor. Go then, but don't come back limping and expect me to patch you up again. He caught the herbs in one scarred hand. For a moment, he stared at them, then at me. My flushed face, my trembling fists, my words too sharp to hide the fear behind them. Slowly, he set the herbs down. His voice faltered, rare and raw. I do not want to leave. The world seemed to still. I have walked from battlefield to battlefield, from one burning frontier to the next, he continued, each word pulled like stone from his chest. I thought my only purpose was the sword in my hand, the men at my back. But when all of that was stripped away, I came here. I should have died in the storm that night. Instead, his gaze softened, lingering on me. Instead, you dragged me into your hut. You scolded me, fed me, stitched me back together. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. My throat tightened. I tried for a joke, but it came out hoarse. Alive enough to complain about my cooking anyway. He took a step closer, his presence filling the room, but gentler than it had ever been. If I leave now, I may never find this again. The sword lay across the table, silent. His hand hovered over it a moment, then withdrew. Instead of buckling it to his hip, he placed it flat on the wood. Slowly, deliberately, as though laying down not just steel, but everything that had chained him to war. The hut seemed to exhale with him. I poured tea, hands still trembling, and pushed a cup toward him. Well, I said, aiming for casual but failing utterly, if you're going to stay, you'd better learn how to help me dry herbs without setting the hut on fire. His lips curved, soft, unguarded. He accepted the cup, fingers brushing mine in a fleeting spark of warmth. We sat together, steam rising between us, silence no longer heavy but peaceful. Outside, the village children laughed as lanterns were lit for the evening. Inside, the general's armor rested against the wall, and his sword remained untouched on the table. He looked at me, and for once no shadow of war lingered in his eyes. Only light. I thought, he said quietly, I was searching for a battlefield to die on. His hand closed over mine, firm and steady. Instead, I found you, and a reason to live. The tea in my throat nearly went the wrong way, and I had to cover my face to hide the heat burning across it. You can't just say things like that so easily, but my smile betrayed me, as it always did, and for the first time I let myself believe he was not going anywhere. His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist, slow, absent-minded, but it sent a tremor up my arm. He tilted his forehead until it rested against mine, our breaths mingling, tea-warm and cedar-tinged. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved, and the hut's walls blurred to nothing. Only the sound of his pulse under my palm, steady and alive. Then his other hand came up, rough calluses grazing my jaw, guiding me gently as though I might break. His lips found mine, hesitant at first, tasting, testing. The kiss was nothing like the battlefield stories whispered of him. No force, no conquest, only a quiet surrender. My breath caught, then steadied against his. When he drew back just enough to speak, his voice was low, threaded with something unshakable. I have spent my life trying to shield a country that was never truly mine, beside men who cared more for power than people. I failed them. And I failed myself. His thumb lingered at the corner of my mouth, a ghost of the kiss still between us. But here, his gaze flicked to the hut, the herbs drying in the rafters, the laughter of village children outside. Here I can protect something real. Let me stay. Let me save them with you. I couldn't answer at once. The lump in my throat stole the words. So instead, I gripped his sleeve, grounding him as much as myself. His eyes softened at the touch, the weight of war falling away piece by piece. When he finally drew back, his face was softer than I'd ever seen it. "Show me the herbs," he murmured. "If I'm to stay, I should be useful." The next morning, sunlight poured through the shutters. The great general of the border wars stood outside my little clinic, a woven basket of freshly gathered herbs balanced on one arm like an offering. He raised his voice, tone surprisingly light. "Physician, if you don't hurry, your patients are threatening to storm the place without you." I groaned, snatched up my satchel, and shouted back through the window, "If you scare my patients with that drill sergeant voice, you're treating them yourself." His answering laugh rumbled down the lane, warm and unguarded, as he shifted the basket higher on his hip. For a moment, it looked less like a fallen general standing there and more like a man who'd chosen to stay.